So let's just take a quick look at our discussion questions that are in the packet. We've already touched on a number of these, so we don't have to go over all of them. How does the biblical story of creation demonstrate traditional attitudes toward human nature? Well, we sort of went through this in some detail. The second one is, what is our approach to the nature of human beings? How would you describe what a human being is? What's the nature of humanity? Well, we're part of the natural world. We're the product of evolution. What makes us unique is our ability to use our brain to try to understand these things, or to try to create communities. Language, even imagination is something that, like lion cubs might be pretending to hunt something at some point, but human beings, as far as we know, are the only species that continues to play all the way through our adulthood into old age. It's not just our rational mind, it's our imaginative mind. It's our anger mind, our vengeance. And our abstract, yes. Right.
Would you say curiosity?
Sure. Right. And that leads to new knowledge and new inventions and new discoveries and wiping out megafauna in Australia. Like, there's all kinds of things that have happened from our curiosity.
We're the first time where the species is responsible for mass extinction on the planet.
Right.
We're in the sixth.
Yeah. And we've come a long way, baby.
Really excellent.
Yes.
And we're going to take you a while to prove it. Really start to. And the museum,
Exhibit on evolution.
So I moved it up to the third floor of this exhibit on evolution that I went through relatively quickly. I think it almost 3 hours. Well, yeah, they organized it around mass extinctions because these are considered really important events. That's what clears the playing field for the next evolution of the.
One of our kids' all-time favorite videos is in that exhibit. It's called How to Become a Fossil. Step 1, die. And then it goes on for what happens after that. I mean, some other features of humanity, our ability to create technology for survival advantage, but also for enjoyment, that sense of play, that our sense of meaning in life comes from personal inspiration, self-actualization, our self-definition of that. And also that, I mean, this is touching on the ethics question, but I would say humanity is neither inherently good nor inherently bad. There's not an original sin or a cursed sense of what people are, or a yetzer hara, an evil inclination that's going to lead us into terrible things. We are a mixed bag. And that's what makes it hard, but also creates opportunity and possibility. Cats do pretty well. Right. So now the third question, I think, is even more interesting. How can an understanding of evolution and genetics inform secular humanistic Judaism? Well, genetics actually is a problem for us. We talk about we're in charge of our own life, we're making our own choices. Well, the more we've learned about genetics, sometimes we are not necessarily making fully autonomous, rational choices about what we do.
On the other hand, if you have an understanding of universal characteristics of the human nature, then you can make choices that are informed by that.
Right. And just because you have a genetic predisposition to alcoholism or obesity or destructive relationships or whatever, you don't have to accept that as your fate. It's not, either cosmically nor cellularly determined what you're going to do, but you have tendencies in some directions, and you have to learn how to handle it. Well, epigenetics is even more complicated because that's behavior and environment affecting how the genes are expressed.
A lot of people now think that, the genetic code isn't an absolute pattern of what's going to happen to you, because all kinds of things can happen between the DNA sending out messengers from proteins and then life. There's a lot of things that happen in between, not to mention mutations change, but it's not really a set pattern. It's sort of suggestions of what can be done. It says limits.
Yeah. Right.
Something between these.
It is, however, a lot less control. Yeah, it is a lot less control, though, than the Enlightenment imagined, with the tabula rasa, blank slate, and you can do what you want to it. Right. Which is not true at all. So learning more about how we actually work is valuable. And this is a coherent description of reality based on the evidence. We want to know the truth, and knowing the truth will set you free. Well, it's a biblical quote, but New Testament. But the idea is that the more you know about how you're actually functioning and why, the more helpful it can be. And then it does in some ways free you to make choices, knowing your tendencies, predispositions, and so on. I also think it's valuable to think about evolution and genetics because it highlights how all of life is interconnected. I think, not just us and the chimpanzees, but I think we share half of our DNA with a banana. I mean, we are in common with so many things. That's true. Evolution is change over time.
It's adaptation to environment.
Right. And it becomes a wonderful metaphor for culture too, not just biology. Jewish culture has evolved and changed over time, responded to new environments, adapted new, the mitochondria in our cells were thought to be a separate organism at one time that were adopted into our very biological functioning. And the afikomen comes from Greek meals, and the lighting Hanukkah candles could be a pagan winter solstice observance that Jews adopt. And so there's all kinds of elements of evolution that are wonderful parallels to our understanding of Jewish history and culture. It wasn't made at Sinai, there's creationist Jews who think that Judaism was created just like Adam was created. And then there's evolutionist Jews who it started at a certain point, it changed over time. What it looked like 2,000 or 3,000 years ago is not going to be identical to what it looks like today, just like evolutionary ancestors. You can have diversity in evolution, right? It goes into different branches, just like we have different branches of Jewish identity today. It's a wonderful parallel for us that we learn from the natural world, but applies to human cultural practice too. Well, and people also imagine Jewish culture was in a bubble, just traveled through time and was never affected by the outside world, and that's unrealistic. Look at all the cultures and languages and foods and dress, and it's obviously affected by the outside world.
Evolution teaches you to go backwards.
Or stand still.
Yeah.
And its very basis, it answers that question that Genesis tries to answer, which is, where do we come from? How did we get here? That's a question people ask. That's a curiosity we were talking about. And evolution provides a realistic, plausible, evidence-based answer to that fundamental question of the human experience. And honestly, evolution can be kind of inspiring. Richard Dawkins is an evolutionary biologist by training, but also an atheist humanist activist. And he says at one point, think of how lucky you are that of all the circumstances that had to happen for evolution to work out exactly to wind up in you being here, you're the lucky one. You're here. You have the chance to live and to breathe and to love and to yell and to play sports and all these things that we do. And so, you can feel fortunate. You can feel grateful. It doesn't have to be to a God. It can be to the patterns of circumstance that enable this to be possible. And your life matters because you were the point of creation, right? you are the not the apex, the telos. You are the sort of the end result of all these centuries, and now look what you're doing with your life. That's what the guilt grandmother would say, right? Right.
We'll never evolve.
Right. Yeah. Well, look, Catholics would argue Jews don't have a monopoly on guilt either. Okay. Number 4, what challenges are raised by the approach of secular humanistic Judaism to death, and what are some of the benefits? So first, let's think about what are some of the challenges to that.
Well, the challenge is for,
Okay.
she said, when her mom died, that she and dad were up there, because it was very comforting to think that, even if she was realized.
Yeah, the lack of reunion is a real loss. There's also, if you get a chance to see Julia Sweeney's one-person show, Letting Go of God, there's like a 15-minute version that was on This American Life, and then there's a longer full version. She talks about when she realized that she didn't believe in a God, that, you mean Hitler got to just die? You mean my brother who had throat cancer and suffered for 2 years just died and he's gone and there's no reward and there's no payback and there's no cosmic justice? I mean, we would rather imagine an afterlife with reward and punishment than to realize that people get away with it, or they suffer and there's no reward or compensation, that the world is unfair. We'd rather posit a fair world with all kinds of other problems than a world where it's just not fair. So that lack of the afterlife with reward and punishment for some people is a real challenge. But if nothing else, the idea that I'm never going to talk to them again, I'm never going to communicate with them again, that's very difficult to live with. And to be honest, our approach is not the consensus popular culture approach. I hear all the time at funerals that I do, see you in the future, Papa, or I'm glad you're up there dancing with Mama. That's what people say and feel, and that's a very popular idea, at least in Western culture. And the last downside I have here is, Chet's point that the end of your consciousness is literally inconceivable. Like you can't imagine a world without you in it, but it is possible. And then the last one is, if this life is all there is, what if I get hit by a bus on the way home? What if a virus gets me? In some ways, you're more afraid of life, or you could be, because this is all there is. And do I really want to risk it? Well, think of it this way. One of the reasons why the Civil War was able to be prosecuted with so many casualties was they had a very firm belief in an afterlife. I think if both the North and the South were largely secularized societies, I don't know if they would have kept sending thousands and thousands of people to die for that purpose. Now, I'm sure secular societies can do this, and there are atheists and foxholes, absolutely. But there's something about a secular approach to life that might make you more cautious. Not guaranteed, but it might be. Just make you a little more afraid of the risks. Okay.
And especially considering the mass attacks of the Chinese, in Korea, North Korea, who basically.
That's true.
I mean, the Soviet/Russians, I know that there's a certain Russian church there certainly, but a lot of Russians don't believe, and wars get fought.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Anyways, it's a possible negative. Yeah, that's true.
They changed things.
Right.
But I always think that the atheists are also a lot more careful.
Maybe. Or they follow the practice of praise the Lord and pass the ammunition, which is an old song. Yeah. So what are some of the benefits of our approach to death then?
Looking back to the fullest.
Right. Yeah.
Not taking it for granted.
We also, sorry.
To piggyback on top of that, yeah, I remember this is probably 45 years ago. We were reading about mystical experiences.
Mhm.
And there was a series of different stories about people who had mystical experiences. These were people who knew they were going to die. And then something happened, like they were condemned to be executed. And then they got a reprieve or something like that, where they were convinced that they were going to die. And the facing their death was a transformative experience. And when we hear the descriptions of how it altered them, there's a lot of similarities cutting across with different people from different kinds of backgrounds. And some of the things that they had, whether had mystical experiences, where they had a sense of being connected to everything, a loss of self-object distinction, a sense of awe and wonder, all these things that we think of as being universal religious kinds of experiences. And they had the benefit of that they didn't actually die. So they had these transformative experiences and they got to take them with them.
We talked as well about the comfort of being part of the natural cycle of life and feeling connected to nature and so on. That's important. Facing the reality of the loss in your lifetime of someone else can help in healing and getting used to this new reality. You face it clearly and honestly and directly. I remember I was talking with your daughters-in-law after their father died, and I said to one of them, this sucks. He had brain cancer and he died. Didn't get to see, I think maybe saw one grandkid. Barely, right. And I said, this sucks. this is terrible. And later on, one of them told me that was actually comforting to hear that, because yes, this is terrible. This person died. It was not for a better purpose or part of a cosmic plan, or this is terrible. This sucks. It validated their feelings, exactly. So facing that reality of loss is actually a positive for our approach, because even if there's an afterlife, the rest of your life here, they're not going to be here. And so you have to find a way to grapple with that. And I find also that when it comes to the funeral or the memorial service or that process, you encourage celebrating the life of the deceased rather than focusing on their death or the promise of a reunion. I mean, in theory, you should be happy when somebody dies because they're in a better place. And people say that all the time. They're in a better place now. And people still cry because the heart knows. And if you celebrate their life, that is actually cathartic and helpful. And in the long run, this is part of my job in doing the service. You know, that those last weeks in the hospital on the machines can be really overwhelming and sort of drown out the other stuff. But if you get some perspective, you begin to see that as the 2 weeks it was in a life of 88 years, and you focus on the positives and you focus on the lived life that they chose and not the stuff they were facing and grappling with at the end. But that's again a function of that positive approach to focus on this life. You know, also there really aren't cosmic consequences. You don't have to worry that your terrible uncle is burning in hell. Like, he's gone and that's it. And you can say they're not suffering anymore because they're not, but also you don't have to fear. How many people went through their life paranoid or afraid of committing a sin that would cause them to go to hell? I mean, that was a real decrease in their quality of life because of that psychological burden. We talked what?
Very careful.
Well, yeah, but careful of what?
Well, we make go back to teenager, but know everything I know now, right?
Yeah.
And then I would think about this, and I realized, it's probably a really bad idea because I might have killed myself in the that would be so confident with my fear, all these things I did that probably wouldn't be safe all the time. Whereas if I thought, oh yeah, I'm everything to do this, who knows what decisions I would have made
So I don't know if you ever watched Star Trek. So there's a Star Trek episode in the Next Generation series where Captain Picard is given the chance to go back to a formative moment when he was in his 20s and relive it. And he relives it more cautiously as if he were in his 60s. And it changes the trajectory of his whole life, and he never becomes the captain, and he's always played it cautious. And he has to, be the brash person in his 20s to become the wise person in his 60s. So that's one of those, if I could do it over again, well.
So the person that I think someone would be judgmental of people who think that way.
Well, you know,
Yes.
you judgmental, you could just say like, unless you believe that there is an afterlife where you get rewarded or punished or whatever, would you really want to live your life controlled by fear and shame and guilt versus, I think it restricts your freedom if you're controlled.
I wouldn't, but I think there's a flip side of it, which is, you're feeling confident that, that you're going to be in a good place. You feel confident. You're not fearing death. You're not going through good because you know you've done your work to protect yourself.
Yeah, until you accidentally have a light switch on Shabbat. I mean, but I mean, I hear what you're saying, Michael, and I understand the desire not to judge and so on. When you talk to people who've left fundamentalist traditions, Jewish or otherwise, and they talk about the constant surveillance, the constant fear of sin, the constant sense of inadequacy, and it's not necessarily a psychologically healthy experience for them. So the last question I just wanted to touch on, because I know we're coming up against 9 o'clock. We talked a lot about spirituality and how to do that. Why is it important for us to stress human power when we talk about human nature? That's that accentuate the positive. that idea of dignity and responsibility that comes from what we are actually able to do. And all too much of religion, the conventional traditionalist religions, focus on what people can't know, what they can't do, how much help they need, why they have to rely on miracles and providence and benevolence. And if you don't have those things, you begin to, wonder, can I make it through life? And part of our goal is the affirmation that yes, you can make a positive impact on other people's lives. You can make choices for yourself, even if you don't know what the results of those choices are necessarily going to be. You can live a life of self-actualization and community connection without losing either one of those ends. It provides inspiration, it provides self-esteem, and those are valuable things within reason for a sense of purpose in life and a sense of, happiness, for lack of a better term.
Well, and even if you have tendencies, propensities, and pressures, like unique tendencies, it's the soft sense that you have some agency over whether or not you actually there
Right.
things for this separate conversation, but the felt sense that you do is a good thing.
Yes.
I happen to think it's an illusion, but it's a really good one.
Also, but you can be doing God's work. People think they are, and they're in.
Mhm.
Right?
Well, maybe this is a judgmental part of me, but I think of it as just a maintained use.
Well, no, but
When you do people.
and there is a tradition you could call religious humanism, which is people who feel like it's a kind of partnership theology where God encourages us and we're the ones that have to do the work, or God gives us the raw material, but we have to act on it. And I have no problem with people who are motivated to do good things by their religious beliefs and their sense of commandedness. I mean, even if you live within one of those ultra-Orthodox communities, they're wonderfully generous people and charitable institutions and all kinds of mutual self-help within the community that comes with a price of conformity and whatever. But there absolutely religious people can do good things too. I'm not trying to suggest that they don't. But when we're talking about how we understand human nature, I like to emphasize the positive simply because that gives us the confidence to live in a life without a net. We are living without a net. We're on a tightrope, and if Rabbi Nachman of Breslov said the bridge is narrow, but don't be afraid, right? Kol ha'olam kulo, all the world is a narrow bridge. Well, he wasn't afraid for a different reason that I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid because I can train my balance, because I can work with other people to make a wider bridge, because I can, know that if I fall, then that I was going to fall at some point anyways. There's all these compensations that we can provide for those fears, those ways we can meet that human need using the core ideas and ideology of our approach to life. We don't have to tell stories or make up stories. We can live with the reality, and that's okay. We're strong enough to do that.
I think an observation that I think that in every culture and throughout history that humans have desire to take control. And the difference between, pre-industrial societies is that they sort of went back and said, well, God's going to be they've ascribed the agency to a supernatural. And with the development of science, we now say take control, but now science allows us to. So that it's still the same impulse. I don't think that there's much of a difference in a sense. It's not that people should go. I think that the movers and shakers throughout history, that they move and shake and they take control, and they may ascribe it to doing God's work, but they're the ones who are interpreting what God's doing.
Well, and they're just saying, pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.
But I don't see that it's that much different in sense. We're doing the same thing, but now we're ascribing to science rather than doctors. We understand it.
But an interesting exploration of this, because of course scientists can also feel like they're God in certain ways and have, is Mary Shelley's novel Frankenstein, which is actually brilliant. And I read it because I found a free copy on an ebook some years ago, and I was shocked that I'd never read it, but it's fantastic. And especially reread the creation story in Genesis before you read Frankenstein, because there are really interesting parallels that she draws. Because what is Dr. Frankenstein doing? And remember, the monster is not Frankenstein. It's Frankenstein's monster, because Frankenstein is the doctor. But the monster is like an atom, right? That is being created by this person who feels like he's God. And they're really interesting parallels to that story. It's also a parallel to the golem narrative in medieval Jewish folklore. But Frankenstein is an interesting meditation on the nature of humanity, because actually the monster feels, and the monster is misunderstood and is kind. And there's all these sides of the monster that you don't get in the cartoon version of it that come out in the novel. Anyway, so we do not have class next week. You can have a secular gratitude experience of Thanksgiving. Make sure to thank the people that make the food, by the way, not just above and beyond. And then we'll we'll pick up in 2 weeks on the 29th with a discussion of ethics and how we can live together better.